Hello friends, I would like to begin with a new series called the Techniques of Integration Webinar Commentaries. Techniques of Integration Webinar Commentaries. And what I'm doing is working a little bit in the book Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2. I worked quite a bit in this book when I wrote my two-volume set called Tapestry of the Gods. Well, you know, that was Tapestry of the Gods, Volume 1 and 2. I have planned a whole series of these books, but some of them will be, I think, video books. I worked in that way, dealing with the integration formulas and the methods that people could apply them. So I would refer you to those books for a more detailed expression, but what I thought I would do is go page by page, word for word, over these approximately, what would it be? Maybe 30 or 40 pages, something like that, and deal with the old commentary sections on the techniques of integration, but also using the text leading up to that, which I did not do in the Tapestry of the Gods book. I'm paying a lot closer attention now to every word the Tibetan is saying, writing, and I think we can gain additional knowledge and understanding from that kind of approach. I thought, instead of beginning exactly with the techniques of integration section, I thought I'd begin with this section called the coordination of the personality. I'll be jumping back and forth a bit. My intention is also to deal at some point with the laws of the soul, and also to go into Volume 1 and deal with the introduction to the 7 rays. We have just, in the book just prior to this, there was a discussion about the techniques of appropriation, the manner in which the ego, or the soul, on its own, on the mental plane, puts forth its influence in influencing the members of the atomic triangle, the mental unit, the astral and physical permanent atoms, to appropriate vehicles through which it will express during a particular incarnation. And also in Letters on Occult Meditation we have some very important information about how the ego, assuming this to be, of course, the solar angel with that aspect of itself within the ego, and prompting the ego to do these things, sounds its note and notices the fullness or lack of fullness thereof when it comes to certain qualities, and then appropriates the vehicles according to the rays which are needed to continue the rounding out process. DK begins here by saying, we have considered cursorily, I realize, the fact that the ego appropriates to itself forms through which expression can be made possible upon the various levels of divine manifestation. And particularly here we're talking about the get my brackets going here, the lower 3 planes. Lower 3 planes. All right, lower 3 planes. And this is the 18 lower subplanes. We observe that these forms in due process of time become embodiments of the will and purpose of their divine indweller, and we would say that after they have ceased responding according to their own limited nature, they begin to take on the qualities of the soul and become reflections of the will of the soul. and of course of its love and intelligence as well. So through the lower vehicles, the qualities of the soul are manifest. This indweller is the soul. Now, what should we call this soul? The soul is it's the extension, extension of monadic consciousness on the higher mental plane, with this consciousness substanded by that portion of itself which the solar angel invests in the causal body, egoic lotus, or as the causal body, egoic lotus. There would be no egoic lotus, at least in our particular chain and system, unless the solar angel were building it. In other chains, the moon chain, and in the earlier solar system, the solar angels, the laws, as they are called, LHAS, is that it? LHAS, did not invest themselves on the higher mental plane and did not build the egoic lotus. This was built through the powers of the spirit itself, which is a method that is not really discussed so much by the Tibetan, nor does he really fully discuss the manner in which the egoic lotus is built of the substance of the higher mental plane under the impression and investment of itself of the solar angel, appearing then in the ego, or in that causal body, as what we might call the angel of the presence. This indweller is the soul. As the you see, it's such a in a way ambiguous word. Oftentimes we do mean that part of man that finds itself on the higher mental plane, but it's a bit of a composite being. It's the heart center in a way of the monad. The very central fire of this soul is the monad, the extension of the monad on the higher mental plane, or we sometimes call it the jewel in the lotus. Its exact position, which is still a little mysterious to thinkers such as ourselves, is between the higher mental plane and the Buddhic plane. But for all practical purposes, we can consider that this jewel in the lotus has appeared, or this central fire, which will be known as the jewel in the lotus, has appeared on the higher mental plane as an extension of the monad. So this ego or soul is a combination of monadic influence and solar angelic influence. The entirety of the solar angel is not invested in taking care of the ego on the higher mental plane, but a portion of it is, and the old saying is, having pervaded the entire universe with a fragment of myself, I remain, and that fragment is the part of the solar angel which is invested in the egoic lotus causal body. As the evolutionary cycle runs its course, three developments take place. One, the forms for expression are developed little by little as a result of successive incarnations. Here we have the 777 incarnations. It's a symbolic number, as no doubt we've had many more than that. But the first 700 are considered to be in the Hall of Ignorance, and the next 70 in the Hall of Learning, and the next 7 upon the path of probation, which is still in the Hall of Learning and concerns the love petals of the egoic lotus. So really the 777 incarnations do not really concern the three sacrifice petals which are unfolding under the touch of the rod of initiation, first by the Bodhisattva and then the ninth petal by the Lord of the world. Sanat Kumara, who is the initiator at the third initiation. So many incarnations with very, very slow progress at first develop the forms which the ego has taken until they are very responsive and sensitive and are a good medium of expression for the egoic power. And for those powers which are developed in the lower worlds but are transported alchemically under the supervision of the solar angel into the egoic lotus, where they are part of the spiritual treasury of the individual and can be used as higher centers to express themselves in the lower worlds. There are not chakras on those levels per se. It's the petals that are taking the place of the chakras as we find them on the lower 18 subplanes, or on some of those lower 18 subplanes. I think what I'll do here is I'll go here and get one of my diagrams, which are very necessary. You know, we always use this particular diagram, and we see the chakras here on 1, 4, and 4, actually on 9 different subplanes of the lower 18. Eventually, when the Maya Varupa is produced, there will be, I think, chakras to take the place of the egoic lotus, but that is not yet. You know, we're still dealing with a different kind of earlier form of development. Okay. So, successive incarnations help develop a more sensitive form. The impulse and consequent activity of desire, always for better and higher fulfillments, normally, unless something goes wrong and one is wanting worse and lower fulfillments in some kind of degeneration, but we're not talking about that. It's more the normal process. And the interpretation of experience intensifying and becoming more correct and adequate as time passes, and this is through the development of the lower mind and the influence especially of Mercury, the interpreter, and also of the intelligence giving third ray. So the forms of expression for the ego, what we are on the higher mental plane, what we will re-see ourselves to be when the various vehicles are dropped and we come and we return to the higher mental plane, those of us who do return to the higher mental plane. Later, DK tells us that it's possible not to have to relinquish your astral and mental bodies, but if some degree of continuity of consciousness has been developed, to re-enter incarnation having preserved your lower mental and astral bodies and not having to undergo their dissolution. But this would pretty much occur following the complete opening of the second tier of petals, the sixth petal, and it would indicate that the second initiation had been passed. Then it would be possible to offer that body up to a higher teacher if there was a demand. Okay, so 3 developments take place. The forms are developed, and the self within, or identified with the form nature, the self, you know, or the consciousness of an inner center, the soul at this level is the self, is consciousness, or I call it being consciousness. Oh, being consciousness. Well, I call it something like that. Being consciousness. Right, and I'd be interested to see what I do call it. Here it is. B/C. That's what it is. being consciousness. I sometimes forget those things, you know. B/C, being consciousness. That's really what we are. We are a unit of life, a unit of pure being, with the added quality of consciousness which allows that unit to touch other units immersed temporarily in matter, which is yet another extension of self-awareness. Matter itself is only well, I can call it self-sight. I sometimes have called it that in my infinitization book. When the one self, by whatever mysterious process, becomes aware of itself, matter is created. It is that awareness of self. Okay. Or yes, it is that of which consciousness becomes aware when the one self sees itself. I know that's all terribly philosophical, and we could get into that at some point and talk about how the entire universe is really, in my view, what I call self-sight. But I don't want to mix these things up too much here. Let's just say that the self within, or identified with the form nature, becomes slowly conscious and consequently intelligently active in the three worlds of human evolution, but notice, not so much self-conscious, but more conscious of the not-self. Really, there is no not-self, but okay, we call everything that appears to surround us as not-self, and we call the center of being consciousness with its vehicles of expression, we call that the self. Later it's all seen to be one self, and the not-self cannot really be considered anything other than the self. There's only one being, and everything that is experienced is simply the extensions of the one being. Not so much the creations of the one being, but the extensions. And right there is a theological point over which a lot of blood has been spilled, I'm sure, whether God created or God became. But in occultism, it seems best to consider that God became all things. It's a kind of philosophical pantheism, of which maybe HPB would approve. Okay, so this the self within, or identified with the form of nature, becomes slowly conscious and consequently intelligently active in the three worlds of human evolution. So the mind, which the solar angel fanned or stimulated, becomes ever more active in relation to the not self. And then this the self within, which is that point of being consciousness, shifts its attention, its focus of attention successively from one body to another, passing in consciousness into higher and higher states of awareness until the path of pursuit, which is, we might say, call this the path of outgoing desire and the pursuit of the fulfillment of such desires, becomes the path of return. And now there is a incoming, a reorientation, a reversal of the wheel, sometimes called repentance, to turn around and turn the other way. Becomes the path of return, and desire for identification with forms changes into aspiration for self-awareness. Now, presumably, we as aspirants and disciples of the great ones, we are in this latter phase. As aspirants and disciples of the great ones, we have reversed the wheel, or are reversing it, and we are going back towards our source, to reach our source and to re-identify with our source and to realize what we are internally rather than what we seem to be externally. during those periods of identification with the not-self. This is our objective. Later comes identification with the self on its own levels of consciousness, and we can assume that to be, at first, the monadic plane. Because the true self is the monad. But of course the monad, even on the monadic plane, is not in full expression. It is in still a contained expression, an immersed expression. It is immersed in matter, and still even the high akasha on the cosmic physical plane, of which presumably the vehicle of the monad is built, is still a containment, still a limitation. And then the self within reorients itself and occultly leaves behind the hitherto desirable and aspires to that which has not hitherto been seen, or we can say it has been forgotten due to the descent of the monad into matter. I oftentimes say that all consciousness of any kind is monadic consciousness. There's only one spirit, one being, and one consciousness. So no matter how contained and cribbed, cabined, and confined, as the old words go, that consciousness seems to be, it is an attenuation of monadic consciousness. I call it the monad in attenuation, like missing in action. MIA, missing in action. Well, that's exactly what we monads are. We monads are missing in action. We are MIAs, missing in action. In other words, we've descended into the world of activity, the world of fragmentation, the world of many, many changes, and on the mutable cross, the sense of our real self is missing in all of this activity. All right, and then, so what do we have here? We have several things happen, 3 developments take place in the evolutionary cycle as it runs its course. So the forms of expression are developed, and then the soul becomes, or the self becomes increasingly conscious of itself, and then the aspirant passes through an intermediate stage in which the process of evolution, wherein divine attraction, in the process of evolution wherein divine attraction supersedes the attraction of the 3 worlds. And this stage falls into 5 parts. All right, this is going to be interesting. You know, you can see the Tibetan's use of analysis within the field of synthesis. He has, of course, long ago developed the analytical mind, but it's not the fragmenting mind. It's the mind which separates and clarifies for the purposes of study, but which ever holds the synthesis and interrelationship of those factors which are apparently separated. So anyway, there is this reorientation going on here, and eventually there will be the identification with a very high part of oneself. But now we're still coming back here to the stage. This is still in the process of reorientation. So we are still in the process of reorientation. And the aspirant passes through an intermediate stage in which the process of evolution, we're in the process of evolution, we're in divine attraction. Now, when he uses the word divine, by now you know divine means of the spirit or of the monad. And the word spiritual can refer to the soul and also to the spiritual realms of the spiritual triad. So divine attraction, well, the monad is then in the process of retracting its emanation. It's a period of reabsorption. Now, you know, this may be you can have temporary reabsorptions. We don't know whether ourselves as a monad has gone forth in emanation for the last time, and whether we're in that period of what we might call universal retraction. As far as the entire universe, what we can observe of it seems to indicate it is that the universe is still expanding, at least that which we can understand. But within that expansion, there are temporary goings forth and retractions, going forth and retraction. And so it will be even in the period of universal retraction. So there are many sub-cycles working in the great universal cycle, of which we can really have no real knowledge. We can have speculative kind of knowledge based upon certain scientific observations, and most of those, or all of those, really in the external worlds. All right, so this stage falls into 5 parts. A period wherein duality and lack of control are realized. Well, what does this mean? You know I may be the higher of the pairs of opposites, the soul, but I am also the lower, and I, the soul, do not really have control over the lower expression, over the activities of the personality, my elemental vehicles. St. Paul expressed this in his very strong scorpionic fourth ray manner. That which I would do, I do not do. That which I would not do, I do. O wretched man that I am, who will save me from the body of this death? So he was really in strong conflict because he realized that there was an outer aspect of himself that would not entirely obey the inner controlling factor, what should be the controlling factor, the soul. Himself as an ego on the higher mental plane. So we start here with this reorienting phase, and we realize, well, we're out of control. And then a period wherein an assertion of self-control takes place through the process of. So an assertion of self-control, we might say, coming from the mind as influenced by the ego. Well, how should we do this? Capital, if I say ego, soul, will we understand what I mean? Soul on the higher mental plane. Usually, when using the term ego, one can mean the spiritual triad. When using the term, I better spell ego, term, let's see, make sure I get this correct. The term ego, E-G-O, one can mean the monad, because after all, the monad is in an egg-like body. It's in the greatest of the eggs so far, and of course the word ego and egg pretty strongly connected here. So using, U-S-I-N-G, and using. So now there is an assertion of the self. Now it doesn't mean, okay, this does not mean, let's do this correctly. This does not mean that the man can yet center himself in the causal body and know himself as the soul on the higher mental plane. Not yet. But the mind, which has will, can realize the will of the soul and attempt to enforce it. As they say with the word, when mind means will, you mind me. You do as I will, you do as I say, see. So a period wherein the assertion of the self takes place through the following process, decentralization. So that's, let's say, no longer looking at oneself as the so-called center of the world. The world revolves around me, and standing back and seeing that one is only a point among many, many points. Again, I stand a point within a circle and yet myself. Comprehension of the task itself, so the mind enters here and sees what one must do. An investigation by the divine observer of the nature of form life, and we can say, and how it tends to captivate consciousness through wrong identification. When we get into an emotional state, we say, I am angry, and I am happy. I am depressed. Well, and the observing consciousness will obviously say, my emotional vehicle has anger, is in a state of anger. This vehicle is in a state of depression. This vehicle, I stand back, is in a state of happiness. It's kind of difficult to disidentify from happiness. A lot of us, when we're happy, we say we are happy, and that's that. But standing back through decentralization. Let's go further. Yes, if we know what we're doing, if we know what we are to do, if we know the steps, we can ensure that we are taking them. And then what is the form life, and how does it behave, and how can I keep it from overcoming? How can I keep the form life from overcoming my consciousness? And then this divine expression through the medium of the form, understandingly practiced. And, well, if we want to call it divine, let's just say at least soul expression. Or, yeah. This is not yet monadic expression. So we have here the intermediate stage. Self-control is missing, and now we try to assert control through various methods which involve a lot of D's, the D's. Whoops. Every time I write the word D's, I have disciple. So, nope, it's not going to let me do this. Well, here we have discipline, dispassion, detachment, decentralization, and are there any more? There might be another D somewhere in there. Discipline, especially for the physical body, dispassion for the astral, detachment for the mental, and decentralization for the personality. We are no longer the center of our world, and we are no longer the victims of ahamkara. And then another stage occurs, and this is the state, we're talking about the stages here, 5-part stage, lack of control, attempted control, and so let's look at this, and we'll put this down. Lack of control, attempted control, and then a period wherein alignment takes place. And through understanding and practice, the form is gradually subordinated to the requirements of the self and begins to work in unison with that self. Well, we can say that with alignment, the nature of the self can get through to the usually rebellious elemental lives of the personality. So the personality vehicles want to have a stimulation along their own line. They want to do what they want to do, even though not consciously wanting to do these things. They have tendencies, and with the alignment allows for the impression of the soul upon these vehicles. Alignment allows for impression, of the soul upon these vehicles. And with that impression, the requirements are imposed. And the vehicles fall into line. It's kind of a military term, fall into line, get into line, line up, and hold yourself there. And there's enough discipline asserted through the mind and through the inner being to hold these vehicles in alignment so they don't run away with the person. I mean, like let's say if you overeat, you shouldn't do it, but, the elemental vehicle wants more and more, and so you overeat, and then you suffer for it. Or if you engage in some kind of emotional display of grief or anger or depression, your emotional vehicle is out of alignment with what the requirement of the soul would be. And, suppose your mind runs away with you, and you become interested in all kinds of things, and you get off the track, and you become involved in a lot of lower monastic activity, and the main point or purpose that the soul would have you think about, or that your higher self would direct your lower self to think about and act on, is lost in all of this mental activity and the likely confusion that results from it. And then another period wherein the forms align that increase at increasingly frequent intervals. Now that's really important, because alignment does not hold forever at first. It holds for a while, and then the old habits return, and that is a difficulty that every sincere aspirant and disciple recognizes. You succeed for a while. You know the presence of the higher of the pairs of opposites for a while. You feel the unity, you feel the light, the love, some of the power of the soul, and then there you are back to being your old self. So what does it say? Backward and forward shifts my little self, e'en as a bird soars into heaven and settles back again upon the tree. So there is this oscillation between the pairs of opposites. It's very Geminian. We're now one thing, we're now another, and that's because we don't have the ability yet to keep the ego on the higher mental plane aligned, impressively aligned with the lower vehicles. And what other period do we have here? 5 stages. So this it's aligned at increasingly frequent intervals and integrated into a functioning active personality. And let's just say, at first, not necessarily spiritual, but effective, swept by the power of their own dominant integrated personality life. So these are the 3, 7, or 11 lives in which one lives as an integrated personality, mostly dominated by the personality ray. Personality ray. Swept by the power of their own dominant integrated personality life, and then gradually controlled by the self and fused into an instrument for effective world service, unified in intent and purpose with the soul. And this is more the stage of fusion, and this is more the stage of integration. Yeah. So this is the 4th of the 5 stages. The stage falls into 5 parts, where we are reorienting ourselves, lack of control, attempted control, alignment, and alignment with certain results, being largely integration at first, domination by one's own personality ray, then gradual control by the soul ray, and fused with the soul. And the final period of this reorientation, a period wherein the personality ray and the soul ray are blended into one united energy. And maybe, some of us are finding ourselves there now and then. And the personality ray becomes a quality of and complementary to that of the soul, making soul purpose in the three worlds possible, because the personality ray becomes the instrument of the soul ray and can be effective in the world of the not-self. And we usually consider those the 18 lower subplanes, the world of the not-self. All right, well, we'll review this when we go along. This is the basic stage of reorientation, and at first, there can be a fight, a battle between the personality ray and the soul ray. Oftentimes, at a midlife crisis, you have that kind of struggle. The personality says, do one thing. The soul says, no, go in a different direction. And there is sacrifice involved when you give up the tendency that the personality ray wants you to fulfill. And gradually, the personality ray is reined in and absorbed and made the more willing instrument of the soul ray. Certainly, there comes a point, I think by the time we reach our second Saturn return, this had better be happening. We don't want to still be struggling with the issue of personality domination. We don't want to have such an opponent. We want to have a more willing cooperator in our personality. All right. Now what else? It is thus that we progress, and in this manner, form and consciousness, well, that's form and soul, appearance and quality, that's again personality and soul. Personality is the appearance of the soul, it's the extension of the ego on its own plane. Appearance and quality are brought together and divine unity is achieved. Now here he's pretty much using the word divine to mean soul, but other times he discriminates. So here he uses the term divine to mean soul and the soul personality union. Other places he discriminates between spiritual and divine, thus ending the duality hitherto sensed, which up till this time has handicapped the aspirant, especially the aspirant. While an aspirant by nature is a fighting unit, a struggling unit, sometimes called the wretched aspirant. When you're torn in different directions, you tend to be in a certain state of wretchedness. This is the term my daughter Heidi is always using. She's working with a lot of people and helping them discover their own wretchedness and how to resolve that into a state of radiant unification. So it is thus that we progress. And maybe I will just quickly review this just to keep it in our minds. I'll go back here. There are three factors involved, I believe. So three developments as the evolutionary cycle runs its course. There's the development of the forms through successive incarnations and the fulfillment of desire and the elevation of desire and the interpretation of experience and making experience comply with the more illumined mind. So we are able to manage our environment and fulfill our desires, which are in the process of elevation. And then the second phase here, at first the self is identified with the form nature and is becoming intelligently capable of managing the not-self, but it shifts its focus from the Lemurian to the Atlantean to the Aryan stages, from involvement with the physical body to involvement with the emotional body, and then finally focus in the mental body, and finally reorients altogether, starts to reorient itself to the unseen, and not to the objective, not to the appearance, not to the form, not to the personality. It leaves that personality behind and reorients towards something that it can't quite grasp but senses is there. Then the third factor, the aspirant is passing through this stage of divine attraction. He's been reoriented, let us say. I mean, DK did mention something here which goes way ahead of all these phases. He calls it the identification of the self on its own, identification with self on its own level of consciousness. That's, let's just say, this is far ahead. But then he keeps going. We have the reoriented aspirant, and he's going through the attraction towards the real. And he realizes that he's far from it because he has lack of control. He's a battleground. And the wayward lower self has to be brought under the control of his own higher nature. And it's done through the power of the mind. He begins to see that he's not the center of things. He begins to understand through the teaching and through his own intuition what he has to do in order to bring the vehicles under control. And he really learns all about the form life and how it customarily obscures his higher consciousness. And then he begins to actually be able to express his soul through a refined personality, through the form. And he expresses this with understanding of the requirements of the personality as well. So he doesn't just override the personality entirely and make of it what DK calls a poor dead thing. So this divine expression is occurring in various phases. Alignment is taking place occasionally. The alignment is becoming effective and more frequent. And when it does, he can become a powerful personality, not necessarily spiritual at first, but that is also a soul achievement. When there is that powerful integrated personality at first, even for 3, 7, or occasionally he says DK 11 lives, it is the soul achievement to make that effective personality. And then gradually the self is asserting itself more, and through this effective personality, a higher quality begins to manifest, and then the personality is unified with the soul purpose and the soul intent. And then this semi-climactic phase, where the personality and soul ray are blended into one. This is a kind of into one united energy. Let's call this fusion. And we do have coming up some fusion formulas, which we will want to discuss. And they are fairly advanced methods of meditation, isolated unity and what's it called? I want to say meticulous entirety, inclusive reason it's called, and then presented attributes. So we progress in this manner. And we go through these phases, and you can pretty well tell where you are, Are you the wretched, struggling aspirant, conscious of the rending duality and torn now in one direction and now in another? Or have you, under Vulcan, so to speak, gotten a grip on yourself, or really on your not-self, on your lower self, you, the inner self, getting a grip on your lower self through alignment and through impression and through the 4 Ds, which we can call discipline, dispassion, detachment, and decentralization. Yeah, maybe there are only 4 Ds. I don't know. D, actually, in our English language, equates to the number 4. Maybe there's only 4, but I have a feeling there's one more that I've taught, and which I cannot remember at the moment. Anyway, 2 angles of this matter warrant our attention. One that is that covering the processes of the past evolutionary cycle, which, as it has transpired, has brought the aspirant to the point of a sense duality. Now, this is, this is occurring in the hall of learning, where the pairs of opposites begin to present themselves, and a person realizes that there actually are 2 selves here, rather than the kind of unified, egoistic, ahamkaric self which was experienced in the hall of ignorance. So in these processes of the evolutionary cycle during the 700 symbolic incarnations, and on the mutable cross, he's been brought to the point of a sense duality, of constant struggle and of a hardly achieved with difficulty, hardly achieved reorientation towards reality, and we can say that this is occurring in the fifth petal. Well, I should be able to get that, right? I think. Occurring in the fifth petal. It's a very momentous process, this fifth petal process, and when we start to go through this as we discuss the egoic lotus in greater detail, we'll talk about all the things that can happen in the various petal processes so one has an idea of what one is doing in terms of stimulating, organizing, unfolding, opening the petals. So there's this hardly achieved or reorientation towards reality. We sometimes call it reversing the wheel. The first reversal of the wheel. It's not entirely successful because the wheel still is turning in two directions simultaneously, so there's a rending process going on. So that period has been adequately covered for all present purposes by science, exoteric and esoteric, the stage of evolution. And we understand something about how a human being develops into a better human being by cultivating the physical body, the sensitivity of the emotions, the clarity and reasoning powers of the mind. All of these things are the improvement of the form through which the ego or the self is expressing. But the other is a period of ultimate perfection which is finally achieved as a result of the struggle. Being a human being, and a member of the fourth kingdom of nature, you're going to have to struggle. You know, the fourth ray is the ray of struggle. And for us on this planet, the symbol of which is the encircled cross, there is inevitably struggle. And, our struggle is largely between the energies of the moon chain and of the earth chain, and in a larger sense here on this planet, between the energies generated during the previous solar system and not quite brought to the point of fulfillment they should have been, those energies of the previous solar system and the energies of our present solar system. This is the struggle which is occurring right here within the soul and personality, which in a way are reflections of those two kinds of energies, namely third ray energies below and second ray energies above, generically considered. So the other is the period of ultimate perfection which is finally achieved as a result of the struggle. One period lies far behind us, and intelligent humanity has traveled far towards the period of realization. The other period lies far ahead for most, and most of us are, what can we say, in the middle. Although I oftentimes think that if we really have stepped foot on the path and really have taken the first initiation, it seems to me that maybe 99% or more of our incarnations have already been lived, and the shorter but far steeper path lies ahead of us. So, when did humanity become intelligent? Well, at some point, I suppose, approaching the Aryan race. This doesn't mean that there weren't very intelligent types among humanity in those days, but the rank and file of humanity so far is not yet even really what you can call intelligent. Intelligent humanity largely came from the moon chain, with some exceptions from the earth chain, who have, like the Christ, traveled very far, very fast. So we're sort of in the middle here, and we can consider that quite a number of lives do lie ahead of us. If we find ourselves taking the first initiation, might it be that 30 or 40 lives still lie ahead of us before we become a master of the wisdom? It just all depends on the type of effort we make. The time equation is rather in our own hands, I do believe. So one period lies far behind us, and the other far ahead, we will confine our studies to the task of the aspirant as he reorients himself upon the probationary path. And I want to say during the fifth pedal process, and becomes increasingly aware of the world of higher values and of the existence of the kingdom of God. And as we know, this is the fifth kingdom. On this path, he senses his duality in an almost distressing manner. Sometimes high, sometimes low. It's the experience of the mystic who would be in the world of God more often than he can be because his form is always fluctuating. In esoteric astrology, we're reminded of the sign Aquarius with its hills and valley type of experience, the highs and lows of the emotional nature. Doesn't mean that all Aquarians are necessarily mentally focused. We have to understand that. You can be focused in any one of the vehicles and be born in any sign. On this path, he senses his duality in an almost distressing manner and begins to aspire towards unity. Found where? Found in the world of the soul, and on the higher mental plane. This is the task today of the vast numbers of world aspirants, those who are trying to improve their lives and become more sensitive and more responsive to the real things. So widespread is the desire for this reorientation that it has produced the present world upheaval. It's so interesting. As long as things were just in a rather material orientation and there was not a struggle against the prevailing materiality, there would be no fight. But the world aspirant is facing his own dweller. So the world aspirant is facing, through struggle, his own dweller on the threshold, and is the spiritual source of the specific cause of the ideological conflicts now going on in every country. Well, there are, what can we say, material ideologies and spiritual ideologies. Oh, let's spell it. And people have their desire body, and for some the desires are oriented in a rather low way or in a horizontal way, and for others who are true aspirants, it's oriented towards higher vibrations. And those who are oriented towards the higher vibrations just don't want to abide the old ways anymore because they find them so terribly confining. And those who do abide by the old ways are threatened by the ones who seek to establish a new level of orientation, and they seek to subdue those aspirations and to dampen the rising spirit of aspiration. All right. So where are we? We will deal with the work of the disciples of the world as, having endeavored to bring about the desired reorientation, they learn the basic necessity of integrating the personality, into an effective instrument, and from that pass on to achieve contact or fusion with the self, the ego, the soul. See, so notice the way these three words are considered equivalent. They're not really, but we can't always be stopping to define every word. We have to use some words in a general sense, and it is the perception of the reader that is left to understand how the word is being used in a particular context. It will be wise to keep these three stages carefully in mind, because all the many modern psychological problems are founded upon them. Okay. Well, I think we have reached the end of techniques of integration, webinar commentaries, number 1, page 344. Right, page 344 of Esoteric Psychology 2, and beginning with Techniques of Integration Webinar Commentaries 2. Page, is that a 2? Oh, come on, 2. Page 344 of Esoteric Psychology 2. All right. And we're just about at that point, and our time is just about right. It's good, so we'll move on. I mean, esoteric psychology is absolutely vital. The large majority of the disciples are somewhere between the first and the second initiation. To be a true disciple, one has to have taken the first initiation, the birth of the Christ in the heart. I mean, one may have forgotten one has taken it, and one might temporarily stifle those realizations with other kinds of concentrations in the lower world, but behind every true aspirant is this first initiation. At least that's what Master DK tells us. So we'll go on to Techniques of Integration Webinar Commentaries number 2, and we're talking about the preparation of the coordination of the personality leading into the integration of the personality. Okay, we'll see you soon. Off on a new adventure.